this is the difference. That Jesus exists and he possesses all of... Let me go even crazier than this. Are you ready? I want to show you this description of Jesus, this description of somebody important, a person of interest from the scriptures. So here's the description, pretty powerful description. In some ways, it's as good as the description from Mithras. That's not Jesus either.
Mithras? I don't know about that. But anyways, all right. So, escaped death and a king's decree as a baby, lived in Egypt as a child but returned, was tempted while in the wilderness, taught God's law from a mountain, worked a miracle with the sea, fed thousands miraculously with bread, served as a mediator for his people, spoke the word of God to his followers, known for his gentleness and strength. I wonder who could that be? Now, that could be Jesus, because Jesus definitely did all those things, but let's see who it is.
That's Moses.
Whoa, fuck! Where's my hat? Ah, shit, here we go. Oh, well, shit! Fucking Moses. Now, anybody that reads the Gospel of Matthew will know that the Gospel of Matthew sort of sees Moses as a prefigure to Jesus. This is heavily indicated in the birth story of Jesus. In Matthew's gospel, what you have is this slaughter of the innocents, where Herod is told that the king of the Jews will be born, and so he has all the kids killed. Well, this is similar to when Moses was born, and Pharaoh has all of the Jewish kids killed. Moses' mother puts him in the the basket, the woven basket, sends him down the Nile or the river or whatever, and he ends up right at the fucking palace, and he becomes the son of a king, whatever. And I mean, essentially the same thing happens for Jesus, with the exception that it's mirrored in the New Testament, because Jesus has to flee into Egypt, and I guess, Moses flees even farther into Egypt, and then, of course, Jesus escapes out of Egypt, whereas Moses, he returns to Egypt. There's minor differences, but they all have like narrative reasons for doing so. The gospel writers were looking to tell a story, and so they're obviously going to implement some very common storytelling tactics exactly like this in mirroring.
I'll give you another biblical description. Sounds like Jesus to me. Nope, not Jesus. That's Joshua.
Another list. Okay. His name means God saves. Joshua, Yeshua, began in obscurity but rose to a position of honor, anointed to lead and shepherd his followers, brought deliverance from the enemies of God, appointed 12 men as important leaders, did for God's children what Moses could not do, promised and gave rest to his people, interceded for the sins of his people. Obviously, Jesus is also considered to be a new Joshua, or at least Joshua is seen as a prefigure to Jesus. And so all of the things that describe Joshua are also going to describe Jesus.
It turns out that Jesus sounds a lot like the archetypes, the Jewish patriarchs. Here's the entire list.
All right, so now Jay Warner Wallace has this list describing 5 different patriarchs of the Old Testament. And of course, these are going to be curated lists that describe Jesus.
Of all of that description for you. And it turns out that this is not a description, by the way, it's a very robust description. And look at it. Unlike the pagans, where you see the same 15 attributes over and over and over and over again, this is not the same. These 5 or 6 descriptions are really pretty different, each one providing new data. And these are not Jesus. These are the forerunners of Jesus. So you see them burning along the Jewish time, not the pagan history of deity. This is the Jewish history of patriarchs. Isn't that interesting?
It is very interesting to see how all of these patriarchs somehow culminate into a full fleshed out figure of Jesus. It's almost like they knew what all of these fucking people supposedly did and then compiled them all into one figure. Now, here's one thing that he's not telling you that you really need to understand, is that while taken in totality, like the gospel is taken in totality, this is true, that every single one of these figures would also describe Jesus, that Jesus has the attributes of all 5 of these guys. But there's a bit of nuance here. No single gospel representation of Jesus fully represents all 5 figures. Okay, because like I said before, in the Gospel of Matthew, you have Moses being the prefigure of Jesus. And so Jesus is looking, or in Matthew, Jesus is looking to be the new Moses, right? But also peppered throughout the Gospels, you have this whole idea of Jesus being the new Elisha and Elijah as well. Those are 2 people that he doesn't even have up here. But as you can tell, we have like all of these things that are culminating. For instance, with King David right there, if you look at the top there, it says, born born in the town of Bethlehem. Well, as far as being born goes, in Mark, it doesn't even mention Bethlehem. Bethlehem's not mentioned until around the year 80, between 80 and 90, when Matthew's gospel was written. And that was the first time it was mentioned that Jesus was supposedly from Bethlehem. Even David here doesn't fully describe like Jesus, as far as J. Warner Wallace has told us here, in like as far as one gospel being able to provide all of the descriptions everywhere. So, I mean, the fact that each one of these figures provides a new aspect to Jesus tells us that each of the four gospels were told to represent different patriarchs of the Jewish past, while incorporating different syncretized concepts from outside pagan religions. All of this was done in order to sort of combat against the pagan religions that were influencing the Israelites. We just got done with the Old Testament in the Daily Bible podcast. And yes, we're about to start the New Testament on that. The one thing that is very prevalent in all of the conflicts of the Old Testament is the pervasiveness of pagan religions in Israelite society. And with that in mind, it makes no sense to suggest that these pagan religions didn't have some kind of influence on the Jewish people. With the amount of intermingling that the Israelites did, and how that caused so much strife between the Israelites and God, it kind of seems to me like it would be quite unreasonable to suggest that pagan religions had no influence on the Jews. I mean, I can't even count the number of fucking times on two hands here that God was pissed off because the Jews were worshiping other gods. Yeah, it happened all the time. Thank you.
And it turns out each one of these people possesses a piece of the pie that is completely realized in the first century with the appearance of Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah, it's almost like they had all of this shit before, and so they constructed it. Here's where I'm at on like the gospel version of Jesus and all that. So it's either Jesus really did all the things in the gospels, and the gospels are just recording certain portions of Jesus's life, which doesn't make sense. Let's give them that for the sake of argument here. Let's give them that. So it's either Jesus hits all of these points and does all of these things that we have no evidence for, or the authors of the Gospels had Jewish writings because they were Jews themselves, and they copied the Jewish patriarchs, changed the shit a little bit, and made Jesus. As far as the gospel version of Jesus goes, I feel like that the more reasonable explanation is the authors copying what previous authors said in their own religion. That's how you sell a new religion to the Jewish people. You base it off of the religion.
He possesses all of the attributes in that list. So what's going on here?
See, this is what I'm talking about. Jesus as described by the eyewitnesses. J. Warner Wallace considers the Gospels to be eyewitness accounts. And you know what? Even to a certain extent, Bart Ehrman even believes that the Gospels represent or use eyewitness accounts to generate the Gospels. And that baffles my fucking mind because I'm bombarded with Bart Ehrman shit all the fucking time. And he sits there and, well, he doesn't concoct. Other Christians before him have concocted completely fabricated material in order to suggest that these gospels were based on historical eyewitness accounts.